Good afternoon. To introduce myself, my name is really Will Smith, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of Monrovia Football Academy in Liberia. The Academy is a fully accredited school for primary and secondary age boys and girls that combines high-quality education with professional football training. Soon we will be replicating this sport academy model across the continent through a new organization, Lead Africa, with the mission of empowering Africa's future leaders through quality education and sport. And as someone who works directly with African changemakers on the ground in Liberia, I am humbled to be moderating this panel entitled Frontline Changemakers, Lessons from the Field. So to get started, I would like to introduce my fellow panelists. So first we have Noli Mboweni. Noli has been the CEO of Vela International for the past 20 years. In that capacity, she has funded scholarships for more than 10,000 children in South Africa and built a school for 300 students in Mayfair. Prior to her time at Vela, Noli taught high school science at a school in Soweto, where she grew up. Noli, if you could please join us on stage. Second, we have Kirsty Coventry. Many of you will know that Kirsty represented Zimbabwe in 5 Olympic Games, winning 2 gold medals and 7 in total, which is the most individual medals ever won by an African athlete. Yeah. Since completing her athletic career at the Rio Olympics in 2016, Kirsty has eagerly stepped onto the front lines of change-making. Today, she serves on the executive board of the International Olympic Committee, and she has created the Kirsty Coventry Heroes Foundation, which aims to empower Zimbabwean children through sport and life skills. Kirsty, if you could please join us. Third, we have Oliver Mtukudzi, affectionately known as Tuku. Tuku is one of Zimbabwe's most renowned and internationally recognized cultural icons. A legendary musician, Tuku has released a whopping 67 albums in his illustrious career. Beyond the stage, Tuku has been a force for change in his community. In 2003, Tuku opened the Pakare Paye Arts Center, enabling children from across Zimbabwe to explore the power of producing one's own music, one's own art. Tuku is also a passionate human rights activist and a UN Goodwill Ambassador. Tuku, if you could please join us on stage. And last but certainly not least, we have Zakari Momodu. He is the project director at the Aliko Dangote Foundation. He was brought on 3 years ago to help lead the foundation's transition from being solely a grant maker and becoming an implementing foundation. He brings a unique perspective to this panel, sitting among these change makers, as he has worked in the private sector, public sector, and development more broadly. If you could please join us on stage. And if I may, I'd like to begin by thanking Mosun and her team at the African Philanthropy Forum for what has been a highly informative and impactful 2 days. This conference is special because of its unique ability to highlight African voices whose messages are those most natural, most contextualized, most rooted in the true realities of the continent. We have heard from former heads of state, philanthropists, academics, and several business people. And now we have the pleasure to hear from 4 of the continent's most dynamic doers. These 4 people are the ones with their feet firmly planted on the ground, turning imagined concepts into living, thriving initiatives and organizations. They are literally bridging the gap from potential to reality. So on this panel, we will explore this art of transforming ideas into action. And we have a set of individuals influencing their community in entirely different ways. So I think it's best to begin by understanding how each of you guys got started. So please describe your work and tell us what inspired your journey into social impact and why did you decide to step onto the front lines and create positive change. So Tuku, if we could begin with you.
Thank you very much. I was born in 1952 on the 22nd of September It was a Monday, around 3 a.m. in the morning. And as I grew up, I had this passion of coming up with a sound that nobody else has ever heard before. So I used to create my own songs. And when I used to do that, my parents thought, well, this is not a serious thing. It is something that it's a passion. They didn't understand that it was who I was. Then, as I grew up, in my community, I used to wonder why other children are not like us as our family. They didn't have what we had, and we didn't have what other families have. And I think that wondering made me think of, do they like to be what they are? Or do these families create this for themselves? So I discovered that no ways. People were just poor. People didn't have opportunities, but they were people who could do something in life. So that made me think of how best can I help them, because I want them to be my friends. And I think that's where it all began. And as I grew up older, I started realizing that at times, as children, we lose out because our parents don't believe in who we are, but they believe in what they want us to be. So, as I started doing music, my father, since he was also a musician, but never got anything out of it, so he was very against me being a musician. And but I knew that whatever I have, I've inherited it from him. And I'm sure he didn't want anyone of our neighborhood to be a musician, because he understood that there's nothing in music. But I did music, not as a career. I'm yet to decide the career to take on. I did it because of passion, because I liked doing it. And I think as a philanthropist, I didn't know that was it. But I was thinking of having a friend who is more comfortable being with me, because I was lucky to be in a family that was a bit better than other families. So in life, it's all about what you do to the next person. It's not about competing. We are all in this world not to compete, but to complement each other. And as I went on, finding out that, in my communities, there are disadvantaged children, there are disadvantaged old people. And we used to play around trying to be responsible of the elderly people that were around us. That if they don't have anybody to send, I would offer myself, go there and be sent by this old person. And if a friend doesn't have anything, I would go to my parents and try and ask them to help him. And of course, in some cases they would, if they could manage. But I never thought you'd call it philanthropy today. It was how life should be. It was what I wanted to see the next person as. And from there on, I've created the Pakalepai Art Center because I understood the problems I faced when I started. And these problems are still around. Problems of attitude. People don't believe in what the other people are. People want to be noticed, but they don't want to notice. And when I started music, I had problems from my own parents. They didn't want me to be who I am. They had their own ideas over their own son. And I know it was love, but that wasn't who I was. And so in 2004, a lot of youngsters used to come to my place with either songs or film scripts. They would have dancers, and they wanted me to help them. And I thought, some of these things I can't do it. But the best thing I can do is to create a space where they can come along and showcase what they can do best. Because I understood that what they don't have is appreciation. There's no appreciation at home. That's why they're coming to me. So I must show them appreciation of who they are, not what they want to be, but who they are. And as I did that, I was shocked that in a small place I stay in Norton, that 17 groups came along. Groups who were already doing what they were doing, but they needed appreciation for them to be comfortable and to make sure they support somehow. At times, our children suffer not because they don't have any, but because they are not appreciated.
And today you now have 6 groups who have come from your
I
art
do
center,
have
is that
6
correct?
groups, independent groups, that are performing on their own.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tuku. So deeply rooted in his own context, developing solutions to his own problems. Kirsty, can you please just give us briefly, describe your work and tell us what has inspired your journey into social impact?
Yeah, well, thanks, first of all, for being here. It's a great forum. Heroes has been running exactly for a year, so we've realized since being here over the last 2 days, we have a lot still to learn. But my career started, obviously, in swimming when I was very young, and it was a place in which, as a little kid, I was skinny and lanky and bullied and teased, and swimming and sport for me was an area in which I was comfortable, and I came into myself and became confident, and that gave me confidence in school as well. It also led to me getting a scholarship to the US and being able to further my education, which my parents wouldn't have been able to afford at the time. So sport really opened my world up completely, and throughout my career, and when, especially when I won my first Olympic medals, which were the second medals for Zimbabwe in our entire history. Zimbabwe was going through a very economic time at that time of year, in 2004 especially. And I remember coming home and my mom saying to me on the phone, because they weren't able to travel to Athens, and she said to me on the phone, just get ready because everyone's really excited. And I was like, okay. Normally we're just soccer crazy and swimmers not that popular. And I remember arriving home and there being thousands and thousands of people at the airport, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I suddenly realized that sport has this kind of way in bringing people together and leveling out the playing field and making everyone feel a part of something, making everyone forget their differences and come together as a community. And I strongly believe that as a role model, as athletes, as musicians, as philanthropists, as business people, as corporate leaders, you are already role models. You don't get to choose whether or not you're a role model. You get to choose whether or not you're going to be good or bad. in that. And for me, a good role model is giving back and taking what we've learned from a global and international experiences that I've had and putting that back into the community that have always stood by me consistently throughout my career. And so we came up with the concept plan, and we, as my husband and I, he's sitting over there, has always been super supportive. And we came up with the concept of Heroes in 2013. We did a tour around Zimbabwe, and we went out into really communal areas and spoke to kids. And the biggest question and the most frequent question we got asked was, how do I get noticed? I have a talent, how do I get noticed? What do I do? And that started us thinking about, okay, what can we do? What can we come up with? And we came up with Heroes, because anybody can be a hero. Anyone can put their hand out and help their little sister or their peers or someone down the road, a neighbor. And you can inspire somebody by just being a good person on a day-to-day. And so we came up with a concept of going into communities and providing different sports. And right now we're working with kids between the age of 6 and 13. They come and they play sports. We identify coaches from those communities and we upskill them. And for me, sport is a way in which to help develop education because of the soft skills that kids are learning. And in our ever-changing world today, soft skills like teamwork and being able to strategize and know how to win and lose are so invaluable, and I think sport provides that. And the other area is health. Today, on a global scale, we see e-games and e-sports and computer games growing and growing and growing, and that's great for the elite level, but everyone who's just kind of partaking in it is not being healthy. So sport, I believe, is a way in which we can bring education and health together. And through the program over the last year, we've learned so many different things. I think a story that I'd love to share with you guys, we held a tournament at the end of last year. We're in 4 different locations. Hopefully in the next year we'll be at 10 across the nation of Zimbabwe. And I had a father come up to me, and his daughter had won our friendship award for the year, and it was incredible because we asked the kids at the program, there were about 600 kids, we said, right, you have to nominate one person to get this award, and they all started chanting her name, and her dad had come to watch her play in the tournament, and he came up to me afterwards and he was like, you have opened my eyes. I didn't think my daughter was good at anything. She's just, was doing the chores at home and cooking, and I'd send her to school, but I didn't think she was any more than that. And I was kind of like, oh my gosh, are you seriously having this conversation? Are you telling me this? But he suddenly turned around and he's like, you've showed me so much more. You've shown me what she is and what she's capable of and the strength she has and the potential she has in so many different things. I'm going to make it my goal to make sure I give her just as much support as I give her brothers. And to me, that's what the program is about changing those cultural and societal norms.
Beautiful.
It was incredible, and making an impact, and creating what we've heard throughout this forum is young changemakers. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by giving that platform and allowing those leaders that are there that do want to make the difference, the opportunity to do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Kirsty. And earlier today, Fred Swanaker mentioned, we were talking in the context of education systems and how do we transform the way that we educate our children moving, deeper into the 21st century. And he mentioned character and values. It's not just about education solely in the classroom. It's also about character and values. I think both Tuku and Kirsty are great examples of that. So if we could move on to Zakari, if you could just quickly tell us what your journey was into social impact and why you decided to get into this space.
Sure. Well, mine's 2 parts, I guess, because there's me, the person, and then there's the organization that I work for and represent, the Aliko Dangote Foundation. And I guess a good place to start is how did I end up in the Aliko Dangote Foundation, or rather why. So I grew up in a modest, lower middle class home. My mother was a teacher and my father was a civil servant. And it was always a struggle. So, for example, when I finished secondary school, they couldn't send me to university. So I worked for 2 years to pay my way to go to university. And then when I graduated, I got a job in a bank. And I thought, life is good. Getting a bank job in Nigeria is like you're sorted. And, and it was fun for about 2 minutes. But I always felt that restlessness of, what are you doing working in a bank, making profits for... Anyways, even though it was always a struggle for us, my mom was always a bit of a picker. She hoarded stuff, including random kids. So there was always like so many more people in the house than we could account for. And so, she kind of bred into us that sharing philosophy and that, passing on. But it was there, but it didn't really take center stage so today is the 15th anniversary of her passing, and she'd been sick for quite a while, and she was hospitalized for 6 months. And for those 6 months, we basically had to nurse her because the healthcare service is so poor that when you've essentially got an invalid, you can't rely on the healthcare system. So my sisters and I took turns basically doing shifts. So I'd work during the day and do a night shift, and then my sisters would be in university and we'd swap. So it was a bit of an eye-opening experience. Like, you're aware of it, but that kind of takes something out of you. And so when, in spite of all efforts, she passed, I remember going back to work, and the next day, which tomorrow is my birthday as well, so it's like, I really asked myself, what am I doing? And a month later, I quit, because it just didn't make any sense to carry on working for money. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then an opportunity came up to work with the Nigerian government. It was a new civilian administration. They were starting to toy with the idea of public sector reform. And I got a really unique opportunity to work on the ground floor of that. And so reforming the public service was, a personal need for me, if you will, beyond the collective community need. And so I spent a good chunk of the next few years working within the Nigerian government with a lot of donor partners, trying to change the system from within. And it was very challenging and very raw and visceral. And eventually I burnt out, and I moved to the UK, and I lived in the UK for a while, and I worked in charity there as well. And then I had to come back home, ironically, because my dad had a stroke, and that left him paralyzed. And again, it was just like, you're bleeping kidding me, right? Like, you've got this person who's laying there, can't do anything for themselves, and you can't trust the healthcare system. And it was especially challenging for me because I'd just been offered a really good job as well in London, and I was supposed to start the next month, but then I asked for 3 weeks to go home to sort out my dad's situation, and I got there and I realized, actually, there's no going back. And like literally, I came with a travel bag, I had a flat, furnished and everything, and it wasn't until 2 years before I went back. And I had to have my friends pack up my stuff, put them in storage and whatever. So coming back to Nigeria was like, okay, you can't run away. I mean, yeah, I've only got 2 parents and they're done, but like I've got siblings, I've got an extended family, and I've got all those other random kids that mom brought in that are now part of the family. So it's kind of like, well, what do you do? And I tried working with development partners again, and it was such a struggle. And I realized that I had to have my own resources if I wanted to drive the conversation. And so I went back into the private sector and to work with Mr. Aliko Dangote. And so I joined his strategy team within his office. And it was good, but again, it was very much like the bank. You know, you're working for a big corporation that's making lots of money, and it's changing lives indirectly. We've got the CSR, you're creating jobs, and so on and so forth. But it was still a profit motive-driven occupation. And Mr. Aliko had this reputation for being, you know, this shark and this ruthless operator. And I got to work with him very closely, and I got to see the other side of him, which most people aren't aware of, which is his philanthropic side. And I realized, wow, he's doing a lot on the philanthropic side, but no one's talking about it. You know, he's been doing this for about 30 years, and it's just all below the radar. And his philosophy is, look, whatever I'm doing on that side, I'm doing for God, so I don't need to advertise it. But as his wealth has grown, his philanthropy has grown, and it's become a situation where he can't administer it from, you know, his office directly. So he got a bunch of us to sit down and work with him to develop a structure, an institution around his giving. And so we spent the last 3 years building up the Aliko Dangote Foundation into a, you know, organization or institution rather than a handout institution. And so I guess that's the reason I'm here today. But what particularly drew me to this, and so I moved from his office, so I'm working full-time now in the foundation, which, to be honest with you, just before the move, I was considering leaving the group. But working in the foundation has just been so perfect because I'm lucky to work with a man who is genuinely committed and believes in what he's doing in terms of human capital development. And so being a part of that is just like the best world for me to be able to help, to influence that, to guide that.
Great.
And yeah.
Thank you very much, Zakari. So, yeah, round of applause. Unfortunately, we're slightly pressed for time because we did start a little bit late. So, Noli, I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question, and I'm going to ask that you also introduce your story in the context of your answer. And then if we can succinctly answer this question, and then we'll move to the crowd. So, Noli, my question for you is how can existing changemakers and philanthropists collaborate to develop more frontline changemakers? A big part of this entire conference has been the conversation around the rapid population growth on the continent and determining whether that is potentially a crisis or an opportunity. And it seems that it must be an opportunity only if we can create young change makers like those here in front of me. So, Noli, if you could go ahead and answer, just how do you think that existing change makers like yourselves can work together with philanthropists that are here to develop the next generation of young change makers on the continent?
Thank you, Willie. I will just do a brief introduction to how I got involved with philanthropy. I saw philanthropy at home. Both my parents were from poor backgrounds and from broken families. My dad literally had no father, and he was the eldest, and he started selling newspaper at the age of 13 to be able to fend himself. And he always used to pride himself that by the time he sold the newspaper, he had read the whole newspaper, and that made him to get an A in metric because he knew the language. And my mom, of course, was also from a broken family. She was raised by a domestic worker. So she used to work with my granny at the employer's house, but after work, she would sell liquor. So she actually mastered the recipe of the African brewery. We called it umqombothi. That's how we. So obviously, she saw that after that, she had to learn and be a nurse. And my father ended up being a teacher, social worker, politician, and a seasoned businessman, and ended up being a philanthropist of note. So I had no choice but to follow, because I saw philanthropy at home. It started even just by sharing. My mom would literally I mean, in the townships, you'll have, because there's no electricity, you'll buy a big or a big bag of coal. She will literally have buckets and send me and my brother to give to the neighbors. My dad started sponsoring students when I was only in grade 1, but he already started sponsoring students to university. And I'd ask myself, where do they get the money? It was an act of faith. So being a destiny changer, Smith, to come back to your question, I think the importance is not about a big check or a big balance, but it's having a big heart and looking beyond. My experience, I ended up being a teacher, science teacher, and before that, I'd had a very nasty experience that comes to how you fund. Don't look at the A-class students only, because most funders look at the A-class. Now, who takes care of the C and the D? And usually we judge people according to their marks, and that's a limitation because the marks are not a true reflection of who you are, but are only a reflection of circumstances. Like I said, my dad had to literally sell newspaper and wake up at 4 a.m., but he ended up having 2 professions, being a businessman. So if only had taken the situation, we could have written him off. But I always go back to the classroom because I also was there. I was excluded at first year university. Not only failed, but excluded from the faculty. What did my parents do after they bought me a car? And I said, how do I get a car? Rewarded for failure. But they saw beyond what the limitations could have because they were saying, no, you can do it. So as destiny changers, we need to be one, to be in touch with the people that you are serving. Then it will give you a clear, but because sometimes when you're in that boardroom, it's about ticking the boxes. But unless you are there in the forefront and being able, what are their needs? Yesterday, when the other panelists, they were saying, you need to know the language. What is the environment? What are the challenges?
Thank you, Noli. Yeah. So I think another theme here is we can see that holistic approaches, music, sport, looking beyond any potential limitations early on, there's real potential there. So literally 1 minute for each of you. Just to answer the same question, how can existing changemakers like yourself work with philanthropists to develop the next generation of young changemakers? So Zakari, we can come to you and we'll just go down the line. 1 minute.
Right. Well, our strategy at Aliko Dangote Foundation is to build motivators. There are not a lot of African role models that the average African kid can look to inspire them. And so part of our strategy is to position Aliko Dangote in a way that he's able to not intimidate as he currently does, but actually inspire. Because a lot of people are distracted by the fact that today he is the richest African, but they forget that this only happened within the last decade. But he has over 3, maybe 4 decades of experience behind him. And so how we tell that story and how we use that story to inspire other Africans from diverse backgrounds and of diverse genders, challenging stereotypes. For example, all his kids are girls, and he treats his girls not as girls, but as his kids. This goes against the typical African narrative, Right now, he should be married again because he's looking for an heir, but he doesn't buy into that narrative. He's a Muslim, but most people don't recognize him as a Muslim. But his charity, for example, is driven largely by his religious beliefs. So it's about, showcasing the possibilities and having more role models, such as we have, for example, on this platform today.
Great. Thank you. Kirsty.
I think it's a couple different things. I think first, mentorship is something that I think we can do a really good job in. I kind of am listening to all the panelists, and I want to call about all of them after this to be like, can you just mentor me in this area, in this area? So I think it's something, a question I got asked a lot in my career was, who was your role model? Who did you look up to? And I didn't really just have one person. I tried to take strengths from different people and put it together. So I think collaboration and mentorship. Something that we're doing in our program is celebrating national and local role models. So we get our national athletes, singers, musicians, business people to come in and talk to our kids, because then it's relatable, and the kids then can actually sit there and go, oh, you guys started exactly where I am. And so you're creating something that is, you know, a value of FaceTime, like that you're creating that recognition for them, and I think that's really important.
Excellent, thank you. Tuku.
Well, I think the highest level of education is common sense. As motivators, as inspirers, I think we shouldn't keep our distance too far from the people. We need to be as close as possible to them. Because at times they see me, they see a superstar. They don't see me as a person. And that alone can send me away from everybody else. But the common sense is, I'm the same Oliver who didn't have a song, who has had a song, who is yet to have another song. But I'm still the same person. I should be within the people, so that my inspiration goes deeper into them, because I am with them. So I think as the four of us on this panel, I think the more we get closer to the people, the more we can affect them.
Excellent, thank you. So perhaps to inspire young change makers, we need more role models. We need more people to whom young people can look up and say they were curious, they were willing to take on risk, and they were able to kind of sell their product and their work so that others will follow. So now we're just going to take, let's say, 3 questions. We'll take them all at the same time, and then we'll figure out who's going to answer from there. So if anyone has any questions in the room, we would particularly appreciate questions from any of the young people in the room who are thinking about being change makers and eager to understand more from our panelists. So if anyone has a question in the room, please don't be shy. Looks like we have one there. The young woman with her hand up there, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Will.
That, exactly.
On the left there.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us all here today. My question is, currently at the moment, we have a sense of entitlement across the country, across the nation. How, as change makers, are you able to address that?
So you guys can take that one down. In the back here.
Hi, Tiara Dungy, School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. My question is about the next generation of leaders. Back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s, there was a revolution to fight. There was apartheid to end. There were passed laws to strike down. And the angst and anger of young people and teenagers was put towards a revolution. Teenagers are still the same. They're still angsty, and they're building up anger, especially in places where information is rolling in more quickly than the infrastructure is able to keep up with. So kids see other young people doing well, making money, having fun, but there's not really that same future for them. How do you guys propose we better leverage that kind of angsty, anger, ready to challenge and charge energy of young people in a constructive way without taking away their creativity?
Excellent, thank you. And do we have one more in the room? Maybe right there, yeah? You've got the microphone there.
Thank you very much for the great insights. My question to the panel is, yes, we fully recognize the great work that you are doing as change makers, but to what extent are you also feeding directly into macro level or government efforts? I know sometimes the government, as the whistle holders or as the referees in the development space, sometimes they come in with barriers or challenges which affects the extent to which your work can contribute towards socio-economic development. So in that nexus, how do you balance that frustration which sometimes comes from the government? And how do you keep your impetus or your drive to see change happening in light of such unlevel playing field which sometimes governments impose? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So maybe we can tackle that last question first. It kind of echoes what Madame Michel said last night about we should have a national compact, we should have a general vision that every single stakeholder is pushing towards. I think that might be an interesting one for you, Zachary, to answer. Again, just kind of 2 minutes at the most, just to address that, given your position within the foundation is slightly different. You're a change maker, but you're also coming at it from an institutional perspective.
Absolutely. So at Aliko Dangote Foundation, we are pursuing a number of strategic initiatives to have impact, one of which I've already talked about, which is positioning Aliko, the man, in a way that it speaks to the youth. But a second very important, absolutely important platform is our ability to engage and influence public policy. And this is a big part for us. I mean, I have a master's in public policy, and specifically I focused on development and in public policy. And, you know, I worked in government reform. And the people I work with are conscious of the fact that you can't really make, I think this was discussed a number of times earlier today already, you can't really make sustainable, scalable change without government involvement, not within the African context. African society is too community-based to rely purely on the private sector. There will always be a public sector element in whatever we do, and until we can carry along the public sector with us, until we can convince the public sector to work with us, until we can understand the public sector and the issues in the public sector, we won't really gain traction. We'll nip at the edges, but we won't really get that sustainability and scalability.
Great.
So it is something we're working on.
Thanks very much. We're almost out of time. So, Noli, I'm going to ask you to answer the second question about the next generation of leaders and how to leverage their youthful energy in a positive way. And then if you could also just give one final statement around, you know, the power of change making and where things might go.
Okay, thank you.
In like a minute.
Okay. I think I also have a very strong passion with the youth, for the youth in particular. Most of my beneficiaries are youth. So as a philanthropist or as a funder, you need to be very understanding. I'll give you 2 cases. I'm funding pilots. There was one female girl who was already just about to graduate to fly solo. She just discovered that she had a terminal disease. And she came to me and said, "Mom, I'm giving up. I'm not going to be a pilot." And I had to literally say, "We have no choice. I'm commanding you, you are going to be a pilot." So she was grounded. She could not fly for about 6 months. Then finally, I went to the School of Flight, and then they gave her a chance to ride. She's now graduated as a pilot. And then the other one fell pregnant at final year. So she wanted to commit abortion. And I said, no. You're not going to commit abortion because you're scared that I'm not going to fund you. I'm going to look after you and the baby. She's now a lawyer. So it's also about the approach. So we have to make sure we understand the energies and the hormones. Sometimes they override you. So as a philanthropist, you have to use the sense of being a mother and be able to say you are dealing here with a teenager. And at the end of the day, they're going to be champions and winners.
Thank you, Noli. Kirsty, I'm going to pull from last night's moderator a tweet, please, around the final question about entitlement and how we might be able to still kind of push young change makers onto the scene.
Yeah, I think entitlement, it's one of also those kind of cultural and social norms that we're trying to break down, especially in our society across Africa. It's still very hierarchy, wait till you're 50, 60, then make change. And I think it's all about engagement, constant engagement, and getting people to just listen. I think the first step was just getting people to listen and understand what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it. And then you're just working on bringing them in closer and closer and closer until they fully recognize and understand exactly what you're trying to achieve. And I think with young changemakers, I think a lot of people don't see that pride, but the people they're trying to convince who are maybe in areas in which they can either fund or at government levels where they can actually make those big changes, that they feel a little bit threatened, which is where I think the entitlement comes from. So I think it just starts from having a very open communication and conversation with trying to be as respectful and not lose patience. So
Great.
keep going.
Thanks, Kirsty. And Tuku, if you would have the final word, how would you encourage other people in the room, other young people across the continent, to get into social entrepreneurship, into change making?
Like I say, the highest level of education is common sense. Youngsters are not noticed when they do good. And elderly people always feel challenged. And they think, since they were born some time ago, they have a better experience. And you are young, you don't know, you listen to us. If we can at least avoid paying a deaf ear to the youngsters and listen to them, what they say, and try and make a change out of what they say, then we will be able to have more and more changes tomorrow. For as long as we feel we know better, I think it will take us a longer time to come up with new changes. But if we try and listen and complement what we know and what they are asking for and what they want, their view of life, we can then come up with something in much earlier time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tuku. And just to close, I'd like to end with a quote on this process of change making from one of Liberia's proudest mothers and one of my favorite people, Nobel laureate Lema Bowie. She says, "Don't wait for a Gandhi, don't wait for a king, don't wait for a Mandela. You are your own Mandela, you are your own Gandhi, you are your own king." Thank you very much.